it's Usman with ArcaV. Welcome back. Today I'll share with you one of the biggest success factors of any architectural and construction renovation project, and it's probably not the thing that you might expect. This is actually a principle I learned from reading several books over the years by entrepreneurs such as Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, who built incredibly successful and visionary companies. Now, what might this have anything to do with an architecture or construction project or with any kind of property management? The core principle is that such leaders have used to their extreme success, empowering their team to make decisions and to build their products. In other words, by choosing an A-quality team that strives for high performance and building excellent products, they were further able to build their envisioned products despite many challenges encountered along the way. Thus, the products we see in their companies, such as at Apple and SpaceX and Tesla, shows the power not just of any innovative product, but also the power of an organized team of talented professionals all empowered to solve problems. In an architecture and construction build, the single most important success factor on your project is simply the quality of the team and all of the people in it. To put it simply, the more aligned and motivated your entire team is to work on your project, in addition to having the raw talent and experience and work ethic and drive to ensure success, well, that mentality and attitude will carry itself into the right execution of your own project. Remember that the team for such projects varies over the course of the project, but is also comprised of a few different entities. For example, we have the owner and the client, who's usually paying and occupying the space after it's built. There's the owner-manager or the project manager. There's real estate and leasing agents, including brokers and sometimes landlord representatives. There's professional and design vendors such as architects, engineers, acousticians, so forth. There's also AV, IT, and security design, which also typically design and procure components. There's furniture. There's also specialty trades. You might have landscaping or greenscaping, or once I had an aquarium on a project as well. And then there's also some basic stuff like cleaning and moving, which you'll need at the end of your project anyway. Now, an architecture and construction project is no Tesla, Apple, or SpaceX endeavor. I use the analogy to introduce this concept, but in reality, your architecture and construction projects are far different in their nature than those large companies. And yet, the principles and qualities that you should look for in your team are also the ones you should seek to avoid, are similar to how these companies and firms have sought and acquired talent. Now, I want to go over a quick list of the qualities you want to be sure to have in your team, as well as the ones you should be sure to steer far, far away from. Let's start with the qualities you want in your team. Number one, the team works to make sure the proper process is always followed. Following the proper process includes following schedule sequences and milestones, including for design, properly coordinating design and procurement with all parties for an installation, as opposed to doing things piecemeal, and also submitting proper documentation for the design, procurement, and installations. Number two for a good team is a team and players who are mindful and realistic on schedule and deliverable timelines. The right team and vendor will communicate their schedule milestones in advance and will also notify you if there's a situation that might require extra time, involves a delay, or needs additional services. Three, you want teams and members who know their scope isn't created and delivered in a bubble. They know they must work with the full team to ensure the vendor's products are integrated into the project properly, with all factors properly designed and coordinated for the end user's use. For example, a conference room involves architecture, MEP, AV, IT, and furniture, and more. And thus, these vendors must operate as a team to deliver a properly functional conference room. Next, we have members that properly and thoroughly review all the documents. Your team should be detail-focused and thorough, and as such projects require intense period of coordination and stage execution, to be detail-focused is critical. Number five on the list of things you want in your team is excellent communication, including for when things go sideways. A good team player will advise the owner-manager well in advance when things are going differently than planned. For example, a client may request additional design scope, which requires additional fees. On a recent project, my client wanted 9 design development meetings instead of the 3 total that the architect had planned for and put in his proposal. Thus, the architect came back to us well in advance to request additional services and additional invoicing for these meetings. And it would have been really poor form of them to simply submit a bill after the fact without any requests in advance. Another issue in our time of supply chain issues and late shipments, I also really appreciate vendors who provide thorough information on shipments, including tracking and arrival dates every single week. Quality vendors I use also advise me of potential problems well in advance, so we already can plan for remedial solutions. Whereas I've also worked with vendors who have let me know about known delays the day before it was scheduled to arrive and be installed in a project. So, didn't advise us in advance and just in poor form let us know a day before, which is both lazy and unreliable. Now, next, you also want the A team working on your projects. Now, the criteria for the A team is very subjective, but I hope that this list and this article gives you insight into some important considerations. And now finally, I said this before, but I'll say this again. One of the most important skills is to be detail focused, and you want a team and players who are hyper detail oriented. So we must work with vendors and players that understand the requirement to attention to detail and are willing to make the time and commit the resources to it. Now let's talk about what you don't want on your team. First, you don't want vendors whom are too busy or preoccupied with other work and other projects and thereby fail to prioritize your project. This is one of the great recipes for schedule delays and cost overruns, as a team which is not focused misses critical details in coordination and execution. Next, you have vendors whom will only assign you their B or C grade team instead of their A team. This is self-explanatory. Lower quality staffing leads to lower quality outcomes in typical format. Next, we also have a team and vendors and players who will just simply push and pass paper instead of thoroughly and properly reviewing all documents. If a document is passed to your team, they should be checking it and reviewing it as a standard practice before proceeding with the next task. Additionally, all documents should be checked off by the team prior to reaching the owner's level for final sign-off. Next, you also have vendors that will submit paperwork, pricing, costing, invoices, and bills with no backup, so you don't actually know how much things cost. Sometimes it's also incredibly frustrating when requests for backup need to be repeated multiple times with the same vendor. It should just be standard practice to provide backup with every submission. But you also have vendors and companies that don't seek approval for additional work prior to requesting or performing it. I sometimes have vendors trying to sell bills after the fact instead of telling us about it in the first place, or they should have known about some components in the first place to begin with. Which brings me to one of the greatest red flags I've seen, and those are vendors that fail to communicate properly. One of the greatest red flags of even in that category is when vendors purposely avoid informing the client, owner, or manager about issues on the project and instead attempt to bypass the chain of command to avoid any personal blowback. Other vendors simply don't communicate or bother to follow up on their own, whether it's for work completed or for issues on the project that the owner and manager should be aware of well in advance. So now I've shared some bullet points about what to look for and what not to look for when building your team. This is typically a process rather than an event. It does take some time to learn how to identify such qualities, and I'm also finding more and more in recent years that solid talent seems to be getting much harder to find. And thus building relationships and maintaining them with your trusted vendors becomes ever more important as we go forward, over the years. When interviewing some of my clients and vendors for ArcaB's courses and products, I learned that this is one of the core challenges that we have as owners and managers and clients building architecture and construction projects. How can you create the right team in the first place for your particular project? In the next few weeks, we're going to host a webinar on this very subject, focusing on how to find, interview, and build the right team that supports your architecture and construction project. Much like this article, we'll cover in-depth qualities to seek and to avoid. Most importantly, though, we'll go through the fine details and step-by-step process of how to actually find the talented key players that will support your project. We're also building on ArcaB an offering of trusted partners that you can utilize as part of your projects. These are vendors and companies we've already vetted out on our own through our own experience and through the experiences of others in working on such projects. And so what this means, with our recommendations, you don't have to do any heavy lifting or discovery on your own. Architecture and construction projects are complicated beasts to manage and execute. Money, materials, location, labor, design, management of all these things helps keep costs down and get the project done well individually, but it's really the power of a powerful team that has the potential to automatically work out all of those things for you and successfully execute your project. Thank you so much for listening again here on ArcaB, and I'll see you here next time on our next video.